My name is Celeste Navarro, a 39-year-old estate litigation paralegal, and the night my sister humiliated me in front of 14 people was the night everything finally made sense. It happened in my father's lawyer's conference room 48 hours after we buried him. The room had been staged to look respectful. Walnut table. Water glasses set in neat pairs. A tray of untouched pastries going dry near the credenza. My father's pastor sat near the end with his hands folded over a Bible. My Aunt Renata wore navy silk and a face already arranged for judgment. Two cousins kept whispering until the attorney entered. My brother-in-law stood behind my sister's chair as if she had already inherited more than money. I saw the necklace before I sat down. A yellow diamond on a thin platinum chain. Small enough to miss in bad light, impossible to miss if you had seen my father lift it from a velvet box when I was 16 and say, "One day this goes to the daughter who understands what this family built." He had closed the box before handing it over. I had not thought about that sentence in years. Then I walked into that room and saw the stone resting at my younger sister's throat. Corinne touched the pendant lightly when she noticed me looking. "You're wearing that today?" I asked. Not loudly. Calmly. Enough for the people nearest to hear. She tilted her head. "Dad wanted me to have it." Behind her, Aunt Renata made a soft sound of approval, the kind she had made all our lives whenever Corinne took something and called it destiny. I pulled out my chair and sat down. Interesting. Arthur Talbot, my father's attorney, entered with a gray folder and an expression too neutral to be natural. I noticed details for a living. A delayed breath. Fingers pressed too flat against paper. A man preparing himself before he speaks. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and began the reading. My father's estate was not vague family wealth people talked about without understanding. It had structure. A Brooklyn Heights brownstone appraised at $4.8 million. A Newark commercial property owned through Hale Storage Holdings LLC, producing net rental income of $31,400 a month. A municipal bond ladder worth $1.2 million. 3 brokerage accounts totaling $857,000 after the winter market slide. A $750,000 life insurance policy. And Hale Interior Millwork, the family company my grandfather started, and my father expanded into a business that had generated $11.6 million in revenue the year before he died. I knew every number because I had helped my father organize those records after his second surgery. I knew where the vendor contracts were kept, which tenants paid late, which board member only listened when cash flow was mentioned before loyalty. Corinne did not know any of that. Corinne knew how to arrive late, kiss my father on the cheek, and leave before anyone asked her to stay. Talbot moved through the opening clauses. Date of death. Prior instruments revoked. Specific bequests. Corinne got the necklace. That alone did not shock me. What shocked me was that she had been wearing it before the reading began. Aunt Renata received $50,000. Our cousin Mark received my father's vintage Cadillac. Then Talbot turned a page and said, "The residuary estate, including the Brooklyn residence, controlling interests in Hale Storage Holdings, and all voting shares in Hale Interior Millwork, passes to my daughter, Corinne Hale, should she survive me." The room went silent so completely I could hear the air system click on above us. I waited for the next line. There wasn't one. No equal division, no trust. No acknowledgement that my father had 2 daughters. No mention of the daughter who had sat beside him through cardiac consults, insurance disputes, physical therapy appointments, and the long administrative work that follows a man when his body begins to fail before his authority does. According to the will being read aloud in that room, he had built everything for one child. Across the table, my cousin Elena looked at me too fast. Then away. Pastor Lynn lowered his eyes. My brother-in-law straightened slightly. A reflex so small most people would have missed it. Corinne folded her hands and kept her face arranged in quiet sorrow. She was not surprised. That was when grief changed shape. Not gone. Reorganized. I asked the first question that mattered. "When was that executed?" Talbot glanced down at the page. 16 days before your father's death." I nodded. "Witnessed by whom?" 2 employees from our office. "And the prior will?" A pause. Brief. But real. The previous instrument was executed in 2019. How did it divide the estate? Celeste! Aunt Renata snapped, scandalized by the sound of procedure in a room she wanted ruled by emotion. This is not the time. I looked at her. Actually, this is the only time, Talbot answered carefully. The 2019 will divided the residuary estate equally between both daughters, with operational control of Hale interior millwork placed in trust pending board transition. There it was. Equal. Once. Erased now. Several people shifted at the same time. Corinne reached for her water glass. Missed it slightly. Then corrected. That tiny movement told me more than anything on her face. So, I said. 16 days before he died, my father removed me entirely from the estate, transferred control of a company I've worked in for over a decade to a daughter who has never managed it. And no one thought I should know until this room? Dad made his wishes clear, Corinne said. It was the first full sentence she had offered. I looked at the necklace. Did he make those wishes clear before or after you took jewelry from his house? Her mouth hardened. He gave it to me. On what day? What kind of question is that? The kind with an answer. Aunt Renata leaned forward. This is ugly. I kept my eyes on Corinne. What day? She leaned back. The Sunday before he passed. That answer settled something cold and exact in me. That Sunday my father had been in Mount Sinai West on oxygen, too weak to hold a clipboard steady without help. Visitor access had been restricted. He had not been home giving away jewelry from a bedroom safe. I did not correct her. In my work, the first lie is often more useful when it is allowed to breathe. People settle into it. They begin trusting it. They add detail later. So I only said, I see. Talbot finished the reading because procedure required it. Executor powers. Administrative authority. Tax language. Transfer instructions. Every page pushed the same story. Corinna's chosen daughter. Mia's omission. When it was over, the room broke apart in careful, embarrassed fragments. Pastor Lynn left first. Elena avoided both of us. Mark asked a crude question about the Cadillac title, and was ignored. Corinne remained near the doorway, receiving soft congratulations disguised as sympathy, the necklace catching light each time she turned her head. Talbot handed me a thick envelope. Copy of the will. Asset schedules. Corporate attachments. As I slid it into my bag, he said quietly, without looking at me, you may want to review everything sooner rather than later. Not a warning. Not quite advice. At the doorway, my sister stood inside my father's future as if she had already cleared every obstacle. I left with the papers in my bag, the image of that necklace fixed in my mind, and one hard fact settling into place before the grief could reach it. This had not happened suddenly. It had been prepared. I did not drive home after the reading. I sat in my car 3 blocks away, parked beside a pharmacy with a flickering green cross in the window, and opened the envelope on the passenger seat with the kind of care people usually reserve for pathology reports. Grief had a way of making ordinary paper feel medical, final. But this was not grief work anymore. This was sequence, timing, structure. That was the advantage of being the woman everyone in my family mistook for the reliable one. They thought reliability meant softness. It usually just meant I knew how to keep moving while other people mistook my silence for surrender. The copy of the will was clean. Too clean. No handwritten changes. No shaky margins. No correction marks. The execution page carried my father's signature, dated 16 days before his death, with 2 witnesses from Talbot and Reese LLP, and a notarial block completed by a junior notary I recognized by name. Denise Karp, 28, newly commissioned the year before. I had seen her signature on a vendor affidavit in an unrelated probate file in February. Precise loops. Slight rightward slant. On my father's will, the signature was flatter, rushed, as if placed on the page between interruptions. I turned to the attached schedules. The estate summary mirrored what Talbot had read aloud. But one line held longer than the others. All voting shares in Hale Interior Millwork to Corinne Hale, outright. Not in trust, not staggered, not contingent on management performance, not conditioned on board approval. That was not how my father handled business. Even when he trusted someone, he built rails around them, temporary controls, trigger clauses, supermajority protections. He believed affection was unstable and paperwork was not. If he had truly wanted Corinne to take the company, he would have designed a structure around her ignorance. Instead, this document handed her the wheel and removed the brakes. That was my first real proof that something was wrong, not because it excluded me. Men exclude daughters every day and still call it tradition. It was wrong because it did not sound like him. I opened my notes app and made a list before emotion could start editorializing. Execution date: 16 days before death. Witnesses from Talbot's office. Outright transfer of voting control. No transitional controls. Necklace already in Corinne's possession before reading. Corinne claims father gave it to her Sunday before he passed. Father was hospitalized that Sunday. I stared at the last line for several seconds. Then I called Mount Sinai West and asked for decedent records release protocol. I did not identify myself as angry. Angry women get managed. I identified myself as the daughter who had handled hospice intake and needed attendance logs and visitor restrictions for an estate dispute. The woman on the line transferred me twice, then explained that full chart release would require formal paperwork, but visitor logs connected to floor security could be requested through legal process if litigation was anticipated. I thanked her, wrote down the department extension, and ended the call. The next call was to my office. I did not tell anyone my father had cut me out. I asked my supervising attorney's assistant to clear my morning, pull the probate litigation templates from the Harmon file, and reserve conference room B at 9:30. She asked if everything was all right. I told her no, but it would be. That was true enough. When I finally drove to my apartment in Jackson Heights, dusk had settled into the kind of blue that makes every window look occupied by a private life. Mine felt borrowed when I opened the door. I still had the casserole dish, Mrs. Levin from downstairs had left after the funeral. My black heels were by the radiator where I had kicked them off the night before. On the kitchen counter sat the yellow legal pad where I had been tracking condolence calls, clergy coordination, burial invoices, and the florist correction after someone delivered the wrong arrangement to the viewing. My handwriting covered 3 pages. Neat, functional, useful to everyone. My father was gone 2 days, and I was already being edited out of the only structure he had ever respected. I changed into sweatpants, tied my hair back, and made tea I did not want. Then I did something that would have looked trivial to anyone else. I opened the freezer. Inside was a quart container of black bean soup I had made for my father the month before his last hospitalization because he had finally admitted the sodium in takeout was making his ankles swell. I had labeled the lid with the date and reheating instructions in blue marker. Dad, low salt. Add water. I stood there holding that container longer than I should have. Nothing dramatic happened. No tears. No speech to the dead. Just the cold kitchen light, the hum of the freezer fan, and the stupid intimacy of seeing his name in my handwriting on something practical. That is what grief actually does when the crowd goes home. It reduces a life to containers, routines, instructions, and the absence of the person who used to need them. I put the soup back and returned to the table. At 7:42 p.m. Corinne texted me. I hope you're not planning to make today uglier than it already was. Dad made his decision. Please try to respect him for once. I read it twice. Then I noticed what was not there. No grief. No caution. No confusion about why I might have questions. Just management. Instruction. As if the reading had not revealed something extraordinary but merely confirmed a transfer she had been waiting to occupy. I typed nothing back. 3 minutes later, another text appeared. Also, I'll need the office keys, the vendor safe code, and the building access fobs by Friday. Nolan and I are meeting with the leadership team next week. And I don't want confusion. Nolan was her husband. Nolan sold luxury outdoor kitchens and once described our production floor as the lumber place. He now planned to meet my father's leadership team. I set the phone down and looked at the will again. Not grief. Preparation. I opened Hale Interior Millwork's corporate binder from memory in my mind before I physically retrieved anything. My father kept the current minute books and shareholder documents in a locked cabinet in his office at the factory in Long Island City, but I had digital copies of older governance records because I had drafted board materials during his cardiac rehab. I logged into my external drive, opened the governance folder, and pulled the most recent signed shareholder agreement. There it was on page 11. Transfer of voting shares upon death required acknowledgement by the company secretary, update to the share ledger, and board notice within 10 business days. Routine enough. Then the next clause. Any transfer affecting controlling interest triggered review under the Continuity Protection Addendum adopted in 2021. I did not remember the full text. I opened the addendum. My pulse changed for the first time that day. In the event of the founder's death or incapacity, any individual assuming controlling voting position in excess of 51% who is not then serving in an executive managerial role for not less than 24 consecutive months shall be subject to temporary voting suspension, pending certification of lender compliance, insurance guarantees, and key person covenant review. I read it again. Corinne had never worked in an executive managerial role. Not for 24 months. Not for 24 minutes. Meaning that if this transfer went through exactly as written, she might inherit the shares economically, but she could not automatically exercise control until the review was complete. And that review involved lender compliance, insurance guarantees, and covenant certifications, tied to 3 active contracts, and our revolving credit facility with First Harbor Commercial Bank. My father had written a cage around the throne. Either Corinne did not know that, or she believed she could outrun it. At 8:16 my phone rang. Arthur Talbot. When I answered, his voice was low and careful. Miss Navarro, I'm calling as a courtesy. Your sister has already contacted my office, asking how quickly executor authority can be used to change business access credentials. I leaned back in my chair. And what did you tell her? That executor authority is not the same as operational authority. I let the silence sit. Then he added, You should also know she asked whether the brownstone can be listed before probate letters issue. That was the second real sign. Not mourning. Liquidation. Not a daughter trying to honor her father's wishes. A woman moving fast before someone else could reach the locks, the ledger, and the rules. I looked at the corporate addendum on my screen, at the neat language my father had signed 2 years earlier, and finally understood the shape of what I was dealing with. The will was only the front door. Whatever they had planned, they expected me to react like a hurt daughter. Instead, by 9 that night, I was already working like a woman preparing to stop a transfer. By 8:30 the next morning, I was in conference room B at my office, with a yellow legal pad, a copy of my father's will, the 2021 Continuity Protection Addendum, and a growing irritation with myself for still wanting an innocent explanation. There wasn't one. My supervising attorney, Miriam Sloan, came in carrying coffee and closed the door behind her with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had spent 22 years watching families weaponize paperwork after funerals. Miriam was 61, white-haired, sharp as broken glass, and impossible to impress. She sat across from me, skimmed the will, then went back to the signature page and read it again. How sick was he on the execution date? She asked. Very, I said. Not constantly incompetent, but medicated, exhausted, and weaker than he would ever have admitted. That helps and hurts. I know. She tapped the page lightly. This signature is not enough by itself. A bad-looking signature proves very little. A medically compromised signer can still have testamentary capacity. We need planning behavior, inconsistencies, pressure, timing, asset movement, and corroboration. I've got one lie already. Corinne says he gave her the necklace on a Sunday he was hospitalized. Miriam's eyes lifted. Good. Don't argue it yet. Let her repeat it. That was exactly what I had intended to do. I spent the next 2 hours building a chronology. Hospital admission dates. Medication changes. The hospice consult. The execution date of the new will. Funeral logistics. The reading. Corinne's text demanding office keys and building access by Friday. her attempt to accelerate executor authority, her question about listing the brownstone before probate letters issued. None of it proved fraud by itself. Together, it began to smell like urgency. And urgency around death usually means either debt or a deadline. At 10:17 a.m., I got the first hard break. Our office records clerk walked in with a slim printout packet and said, "You asked for UCC and corporate searches on Hale entities?" I had. The night before. All family businesses leave trails when money gets tight. The search results showed no new UCC filings against Hale Interior Millwork itself, which was a relief for approximately 4 seconds. Then I saw the new filing against Hale Storage Holdings, LLC. Secured party. First Harbor Commercial Bank. Filing date. 12 days before my father's death. Collateral description tied to a bridge facility up to $1.35 million. Secured in part by rental income assignment and cross-default language referencing founder incapacity risk. I read the filing twice. That loan should not have existed without discussion. My father had hated bridge debt. He called it panic money for men who wanted to pretend timing was strategy. Miriam saw my expression and took the packet. "Did you know about this?" "No." "Would he have done it quietly?" "Not if it affected covenant exposure for the millwork company. Then find out who needed $1.35 million 12 days before he died." That sentence rearranged the room. Because now there was a reason for speed. I called First Harbor's Commercial Servicing Department as company counsel support, identified the loan number from the filing, and asked for public-facing covenant information. The woman on the line would not release account specifics, but she did confirm something she probably should not have. The facility required post-death continuity certification within 10 business days, or the bank could freeze draws and demand additional guarantor review. 10 business days. Exactly the kind of deadline that makes people rush a will reading, pressure for keys, and try to seize operational access before anyone asks what the bank knows that the family does not. I thanked her, wrote everything down, and then drove to Long Island City. The factory yard smelled like wet sawdust and diesel. A delivery truck was backing toward Bay 3. Men on brakes stood near the side fence with paper cups of coffee. The place was painfully ordinary, which made what had been done to it feel uglier. My father had spent 40 years building something tactile, loud, difficult, and profitable enough to survive bad economies because he understood margins better than pride. He used to say, "People only romanticize family businesses if they've never covered payroll." Inside, the front office fell silent when I walked in. Not dramatic silence. Work silence. The kind that spreads because everyone already knows something has shifted, but no one knows which version they are allowed to acknowledge. Marisol from accounting stood halfway up from her desk. Darnell from purchasing looked at me, then at the hallway to my father's office, then back again. "Morning," I said. Marisol answered first. "Your sister was here at 7. I set my bag down slowly. "With what authority?" "She said she was taking over immediately." "Did she?" Marisol nodded once, then slid an envelope from under a ledger tray. "She asked us to give you this if you came in." I opened it standing there. Inside was a 1-page memo on my father's letterhead, dated 3 days before his death. Effective immediately, Celeste Navarro is relieved of all administrative and operational responsibilities at Hale Interior Millwork. Future authority shall rest with Corinne Hale, who will oversee transition. Staff are directed to cooperate fully. Below that was my father's signature. At first glance, it was convincing. At second glance, it was wrong. Not because the handwriting was bad. Because my father never used that letterhead version for internal directives. We had retired it 8 months earlier after the address footer changed. And he never used the phrase oversee transition. He used assume interim authority or pending board confirmation. He was rigid about internal wording because lenders reviewed management language during insurance audits. I looked up at Marisol. "Did she bring this herself?" "Yes." "Who saw it first?" "Me and Darnell." She said Mr. Talbot knew. I folded the page once. "Did she ask for anything else?" Marisol hesitated. "The secretary seal, the shareholder minute book, the safe inventory list, and your office keys." There it was. Not grief, not inheritance. A document sweep. I walked straight to my father's office. The outer desk drawers had been opened and pushed shut badly. His credenza cabinet was unlocked. The blue banker box, where he kept annual insurance binders, was gone. So was the black leather portfolio containing the current shareholder ledger and signed board consents. The wall behind his desk still held the framed photograph of him with me at the opening of the Newark property expansion, both of us in hard hats, laughing at something outside the frame. Corinne had left that behind. Of course she had. It had no cash value. I stood in the middle of the office and felt something settle. This was no longer about being cut out of a will. This was active preparation to control records, seize process, and outrun review. Then Darnell appeared in the doorway and said quietly, "There's one more thing." She brought a man with her. Not her husband. Some finance guy. He kept asking when the continuity package had to go to the bank. That was the first proof I could use in court that this had been deliberate. Because people do not bring outside finance consultants into a family business at 7 in the morning, 3 days after a funeral. Unless the takeover was planned before the flowers died. I did not call Corinne from my father's office. I photographed everything first. The unlocked credenza. The empty space where the banker box had been. The drawer with the inner file tabs bent backward from hurried hands. The obsolete letterhead on the memo she had left with Marisol. The date stamp on the footer version that had been discontinued the previous autumn after the company changed suite numbers for lender correspondence. Details matter more when people are lying fast. Small inconsistencies survive panic better than big ones. Then I called our outside corporate counsel, Seth Barden, and asked one question. Has anyone contacted you about issuing continuity certification for Hale interior millwork? A pause. Yes, he said. This morning. Your sister and a consultant named Bryce Veller. They asked whether lender review could be expedited if operational leadership had already transitioned. I closed my eyes for half a second. And what did you tell them? That leadership doesn't transition because someone says it does. It transitions because the documents permit it. Did they send you anything? A PDF of a one-page directive supposedly signed by your father relieving you of responsibility. I'm holding the original. Another pause, tighter this time. Original? Yes. Wrong letterhead. Wrong management phrasing. And my father was under heavy medication when it was allegedly signed. Seth exhaled slowly. Then do not let that paper leave your possession. I wasn't planning to. He lowered his voice. Celeste, there's a larger problem. First Harbor's bridge facility has a continuity covenant tied not only to management certification, but to a personal guarantee backstop through Hale Storage Holdings. If the bank thinks control is unstable, they can freeze the remaining draw and call enhanced review across both entities. How much has already been drawn? 900,000 I went very still. Why? I asked. Would my father draw $900,000 against rental income 12 days before he died? I don't know yet, Seth said. But if your sister is rushing operational control, she may be trying to keep the bank from asking that question before she gets access to the rest. That was the structural reveal. This was not just a will fight. It was money in motion. Bank deadlines. Cross-default exposure. Control over a company with $11.6 million in annual revenue and active lender covenants tied to who could legally speak for it. Corinne had not simply inherited a business. She was trying to occupy a command seat before the financing system realized the wrong person was climbing into it. I went back to conference room B with Seth on speaker and Miriam taking notes. By noon we had the outlines. Hale Storage Holdings had taken a bridge facility for up to $1.35 million, of which $900,000 had already been drawn. The loan required continuity certification after my father's death within 10 business days. The 2021 Continuity Protection Addendum suspended voting control for any non-manager inheriting more than 51% until lender compliance, insurance guarantees, and covenant review were complete. Corinne did not qualify as an executive manager. She could not simply walk in and exercise control, no matter what the will said. And if she tried to use forged or invalid internal directives to seize records, instruct staff, or influence the bank, she would be stepping into fraud territory, not family drama. Miriam wrote one sentence in large block letters across the top of her pad. Stop the certification. That became the afternoon's work. At 12:43 p.m., Seth sent over the credit agreement excerpt and the covenant schedule. Section 6.4 required written certification by authorized operating leadership, confirmation of key person insurance continuity, and updated beneficial control disclosure. Section 7.2 allowed the bank to suspend draws or accelerate review upon material uncertainty regarding management authority or adverse information affecting the guarantor entities. Adverse information. There is a cold comfort in contractual language when your own family is trying to erase you. Contracts do not care who was loved more. They care who had authority when notice was given, which clause was triggered, and whether someone lied to gain access faster than the system permitted. At 1:15, I emailed First Harbor's relationship manager, copied counsel, and used exactly the language I knew would stop movement without sounding hysterical. Please be advised that there is an active dispute concerning testamentary and managerial authority relating to the death of founder Julian Hale. No continuity certifications submitted on behalf of Hale Interior Millwork should be relied upon unless countersigned by authorized corporate counsel and confirmed against the 2021 Continuity Protection Addendum. Please preserve all communications, access requests, credential changes, and borrower contact logs pending further notice. Then I attached the addendum. Then I attached the current shareholder agreement. Then I attached the internal management roster, showing that Corinne had held no executive role at any point in the prior 24 months. At 1:31, the bank replied with one sentence. We acknowledge notice and will suspend non-routine processing pending review. That sentence may have saved the company. It also guaranteed Corinne would know, quickly, that the path she expected to sprint down had just narrowed into a gate. At 2:10 she called me. I let it ring twice before answering. What did you do? She asked. No greeting. No grief. Just rage forced into a low voice. I protected a lender-governed business from unauthorized certification. You had no right. I had every right to notify a bank that management authority is disputed. You're trying to destroy Dad's company because you're bitter. That would have been a more effective line if she had not spent the last 24 hours chasing keys, seals, access credentials, the safe inventory list, the brownstone listing timeline, and the continuity package deadline. I'm trying to prevent you from signing things you don't understand, I said. I understand perfectly. I'm the executor. Executor is not operator. The silence on the line sharpened. Then she said, You always thought this place was yours. No, I thought process mattered. She laughed once, brittle and angry. You think paperwork makes you family. I almost answered that paperwork was the only reason families like ours ever told the truth. Instead, I said, Where is the shareholder ledger? What? The current ledger. The secretary's seal. The insurance binders you removed from Dad's office this morning. Where are they? She hung up. That told me two things. First, she had them. Second, she had not expected me to know enough, this quickly, to ask for the exact items that could prove what she was trying to force through. At 4 p.m., Marisol forwarded me an internal email Corinne had sent to department heads from a newly created address. chair@haleinteriormillwork.com. The message announced a transition meeting on Monday, directed finance to prepare a current cash position summary, and asked operations to compile all open project margins over $100,000. She signed it. Corinne Halle. Chair, acting executor. Chair. Not board approved. Not recognized by the bank. Not supported by the continuity addendum. She was inventing titles in real time and hoping confidence would outrun governance. I preserved the email, the header data, and the timestamp. Then I went home, reheated leftover rice I did not taste, and sat at my kitchen table with the legal pad, the bank acknowledgement, and my father's forged internal memo placed side by side. For the first time since the funeral, the shape of the betrayal fully emerged. While I was arranging clergy, burial permits, and hospice invoices, Corinne had been moving through the structure itself. Not only the will, the company, the bank, The records. The house. The timeline. She had not planned to win me over. She had planned to move faster than the system. But systems leave tracks. And by the end of that day, I had enough of them to know this was bigger than a sister taking what she wanted. Someone had been preparing to convert my father's death into access. I found the first personal betrayal inside a grocery receipt. It was folded into the side pocket of my father's black leather portfolio, the one Corinne had somehow failed to remove when she took the rest of the records. I noticed it that night because the paper edge was sticking out between an insurance renewal packet and a draft operating resolution from November. The receipt was from Grimaldi's Market on the Upper West Side, dated 19 days before my father died, 6:14 p.m. Milk, sliced turkey, pears, low-sodium crackers, and hydrangeas. I remembered that evening exactly. I had left work early, stopped at Grimaldi's, and taken the groceries to my father's apartment because his visiting nurse had called to say he was refusing dinner again. I arranged the food in his refrigerator, trimmed the hydrangea stems, and sat at his kitchen table while he ate 3 crackers and half a pear, with the stubborn dignity of a man angry at his own body. Corinne arrived an hour later with a candle from Diptyque and kissed his forehead like a daughter in a photograph. She asked if I could leave us alone for 20 minutes because she wanted private time with him. At the time, I had thought nothing of it. That was the problem. Trust does not fail all at once. It fails in hindsight. It turns ordinary moments toxic after the fact. The receipt had a note on the back in my father's handwriting. Need Celeste to bring old insurance file from LIC. Check founder paperwork before bank review. Ask Serie Talbot up Thurs. I read those 3 lines 4 times. Not because the meaning was unclear. Because it was. He knew there would be a bank review. He wanted the old insurance file from Long Island City. And he had written, Ask C. Re. Talbot apt Thurs. C could have meant Corinne. It almost certainly did. Meaning she was already involved in attorney meetings while I was still carrying groceries upstairs and adjusting the flowers by his sink. That was the deeper moral reveal. They had not built this after I stopped being useful. They had built it while I was still helping. The next morning, I went to the brownstone with a locksmith and a copy of my father's death certificate because I knew Corinne would move the moment she realized the bank had slowed down. The front door opened with my old key, but the alarm panel code had been changed. Another move made before the funeral flowers were fully dead. Inside, the house looked undisturbed in the deliberate way rooms look when someone has already searched them carefully and then tried to put grief back in place. My father's reading glasses were still on the side table in the den. The blanket he used during his last winter was folded over the arm of the sofa. In the kitchen, someone had washed the mug with the chipped handle he refused to throw out and placed it upside down on the drying rack as if order itself could erase intrusion. The bedroom safe was open. Empty velvet slots. Missing document folder. Jewelry trays shifted. What Corinne had taken was obvious. What mattered more was what she had missed. On the top shelf of my father's closet sat a white pharmacy bag from Mount Sinai, containing discharge summaries, medication instructions, and a small spiral notebook he used when he was too tired to keep things in his head. The notebook held blood pressure readings, call reminders, and a series of short, blunt entries from his final month. Some were practical. Refill Eliquis. Ask Barden about guarantee language. Call Pastor Lynn. But one entry, written 9 days before he died, stopped me cold. C plus Renata, keep pushing clean transfer. Do not rush millwork until ledger reviewed. Need Celeste in room for signatures if awake enough. I sat down on the edge of his bed and read it again. Chi plus Renata. Not accident. Not misunderstanding. Not Corinne acting alone in some panicked burst of greed. My aunt had been in it too, pressing for what my father himself called a clean transfer while he was weak enough to measure his days in medication doses and rest intervals. And then the final line. Need Celeste in room for signatures if awake enough. Not remove Celeste. Not exclude Celeste. Need Celeste in room. Whatever happened in Talbot's office 16 days before he died? The version my father had in his head was not the version that reached the conference room after the funeral. That changed the case. Up to then, I had been building a challenge around suspicious timing, forged internal directives, lender covenants, and Corinne's rushed behavior. Now there was something morally worse and legally sharper. Evidence that the plan being carried out in his name may not have matched the instructions he believed were being implemented. At 11:20 a.m., while I was still in the bedroom, I heard voices downstairs. Corinne's first. Fast. Irritated. Already halfway to accusation. Then Nolan. Then my Aunt Renata saying, "She has always been theatrical." I stepped into the upstairs hall before they reached the landing. Corinne stopped when she saw me standing there with the spiral notebook in one hand. "You broke in?" she said. "No," I said. "I used a valid key to enter my father's house. This is my house now." "Not yet." Renata climbed the last 2 steps, saw the notebook, and for the first time since the will reading, looked afraid before she recovered. "We came for personal effects," she said smoothly. "You came for what you missed the first time," I said. Nolan muttered. "This is getting ridiculous." I looked at him. "You sell patio kitchens. Stop speaking like corporate counsel." Corinne's face hardened. "Dad chose me. You need to start accepting that." I lifted the notebook slightly. "Then why did he write that he needed me in the room for signatures if he was awake enough?" She froze. "Not long, 1 second, but enough." Renata answered instead, too quickly. "Your father wrote all kinds of things when he was medicated." That was the wrong defense. Too early. Because she had just admitted the possibility that he was medicated enough for his written intentions to become unreliable, while still expecting me to accept the final will as clean and unquestionable. People under pressure never hear the contradictions in the first version of their own panic. I said nothing. That made them more uncomfortable than anger would have. Corinne stepped closer. "Give me that notebook." "No. It belongs to the estate. It belongs to Discovery now." For a moment none of us moved. Then downstairs, through the front windows, I saw the locksmith I had asked to wait by the curb glance toward the house, sensing trouble without hearing words. Ordinary city life continued outside. A delivery cyclist passed. Someone across the street walked a small white dog in a red sweater. And inside that brownstone, in the middle of a family that had mistaken usefulness for weakness, the truth finally became simple enough to carry in one hand. They had been preparing the transfer while I was still keeping my father fed, medicated, organized, and safe. That was what made it unforgivable. And that was what made it breakable. Corinne escalated on Monday. She did it the way people like her always do when speed starts failing them. She moved from assumption to performance. At 9 a.m., every department head, senior estimator, project manager, and floor supervisor at Hale Interior Millwork was told to report to the conference space above the sample library. 31 people showed up. So did Nolan, in a navy sport coat he wore like borrowed authority. So did Bryce Veller, the finance consultant Darnell had seen on Friday morning. And so did Arthur Talbot, which told me Corinne wanted legal optics more than legal caution. I arrived 3 minutes early and stood near the back wall beside Marisol from accounting. Corinne was at the head of the table with a printed packet in front of her, my father's old brass nameplate set directly to her right, and the yellow diamond necklace at her throat again. The choice was so deliberate it almost would have been laughable if it had not been obscene. My father had been dead 6 days. She had turned his morning window into a branding exercise. When the room settled, she began in a voice carefully tuned for control. "As many of you know, my father made his wishes clear before he passed. Effective immediately, I'll be assuming leadership oversight of Hale Interior Millwork as both executor of his estate and successor to his ownership interest. Nolan will be assisting on strategic operations, and Bryce will be reviewing financial efficiency as we prepare for the next stage of growth." No one wrote that line for her. I knew because no one who understood this company would ever use the phrase financial efficiency in front of men who had worked 40-hour weeks through supply chain shortages, post-pandemic delays, and 2 winter contract freezes just to protect delivery schedules. Darnell looked down at the table. Marisol folded her hands. Old Frank Donnelly, who had supervised finishing for 27 years and still wore the same steel watch every day, stared at Corinne like she had begun speaking Norwegian. Then Corinne made her mistake. "As part of the transition," she said, "we'll also be reviewing redundancies, including roles that were expanded informally under my father's illness." Her eyes moved toward me just long enough for the room to understand exactly who she meant. There it was. Not just theft. Public demotion. Not enough to remove me from the estate. She wanted the company to see me reduced in the same breath she announced herself elevated. It was the same instinct that made her wear the necklace to the will reading. She did not simply want control. She wanted a witness. I let her finish. She spoke for another 6 minutes about streamlining reporting lines, centralizing access credentials, and bringing in fresh perspective. Bryce distributed a one-page restructuring outline that included a proposed hold on discretionary vendor payments above $25,000 and temporary review of all project margin reports over $100,000. It was amateurish and dangerous. We had 3 hotel renovation contracts with penalty exposure if material schedules slipped. Freeze the wrong payment for 72 hours and a margin concern becomes a litigation concern. Then Arthur Talbot stood and began speaking about the estate in the soft, formal tone lawyers use when they are hoping vocabulary will pass for legitimacy. I interrupted him only once. "Arthur," I said, "before you continue, do you want to clarify for the room that executor authority is not the same as operational authority?" Silence spread instantly. He looked at me, then at Corinne, then back to me. This is not the appropriate forum. It became the appropriate forum when my sister assembled 31 employees, an outside consultant, and her husband to announce control she does not legally possess. No raised voice. No shaking hands. Just the sentence. Bryce shifted first. He had the expression of a man realizing he might have walked into a problem disguised as a client meeting. Nolan looked angry in the careless way of people who are used to getting loud before they get precise. Corinne smiled, but only with her mouth. Celeste is upset, understandably. "No," I said. "I'm accurate." Then I stepped forward and placed 3 documents on the conference table where everyone could see them. First, the 2021 Continuity Protection Addendum. Second, the email from First Harbor Commercial Bank acknowledging notice of disputed authority and suspending non-routine processing pending review. Third, the internal memo she had delivered to staff on obsolete company letterhead, allegedly signed by my father. I did not hand them to Corinne. I handed them to Frank. "Read the highlighted clauses," I said. Frank put on his glasses. The room stayed still while he read aloud the section suspending voting control for any non-manager inheriting more than 51% pending lender, insurance, and covenant review. His voice grew slower at the end. Not because he struggled with the words, but because he understood them. Meaning landed across the room in pieces. Corinne could inherit. But she could not command. Not yet. Maybe not ever, depending on what else surfaced. Then I slid the memo toward Marisol. "Would you mind reading the footer address?" Marisol looked down. "Suite 410. I nodded. "We moved from Suite 410 to Suite 608 months ago. Internal directives have used the new letterhead since September. My father was obsessive about lender-facing stationery after the compliance audit. A different silence followed that. This one had texture. Employees stopped looking uncertain and began looking offended. Because a forged signature can confuse people. But bad company paper insults them. It tells the people who kept the place running that the person staging authority never understood how the place actually worked." Corinne stood up too quickly. "This is disgusting. You're turning staff against family during a period of mourning." "No," I said. "You did that when you came for the seal, the ledger, and the access codes before probate letters even issued." Bryce turned to her. "You told me governance was clean." Nolan stepped in. "We are not doing this here, but it was already happening there. In front of witnesses, in front of the people Corinne had gathered to legitimize herself, and for the first time since my father died, the narrative she had built began cracking in a room she did not control. Corinne tried to save it by getting louder. That is the mistake people make when authority leaves them in public. They confuse volume with recovery. "This meeting is over," she said, standing behind my father's chair with both hands flat on the table. "Anyone taking instructions from Celeste instead of the executor will be treated as interfering with estate administration." The sentence might have worked on people who did not know the difference between probate language and company governance. Unfortunately for her, she had gathered the wrong audience. These were contract people, schedule people, shipment people, people who understood that words only mattered when they changed what a truck could carry, what a bank would fund, what a signature could release. Frank did not sit down. He looked at Arthur Talbot first. Is she actually in charge of this company today? Talbot adjusted his glasses, buying time that no longer belonged to him. The estate position is that. Frank cut him off. That's not what I asked. It was the first open break in the room. Then Marisol spoke from my left. If the bank has suspended non-routine processing, who exactly is authorizing payroll continuity, vendor release, and project disbursement? Bryce Veller turned to Corinne. You told me lender review was routine. Corinne's jaw tightened. It is routine. No, I said. Routine doesn't require you to create a fake internal directive on obsolete letterhead. That landed harder than I expected. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was specific. People trust specifics when emotions are contested. Nolan stepped forward then, finally deciding that his role in this had become physical rather than strategic. You need to stop talking like a lawyer and start acting like a sister. I looked at him. You came into a manufacturing company 6 days after its founder died and started requesting seals, ledgers, and margin reports. Don't ask me for family tone now. A few people in the room looked down to hide reactions. One of the project managers, Luis Herrera, leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Not neutral anymore. Watching. Corinne turned on Talbot. Say something. He did. And it was the worst thing he could have said for her. What Miss Navarro has raised, he said carefully, does need to be resolved before operational authority can be treated as settled. There it was. Not a defense. Not a denial. A lawyer stepping away from a client in measured language. You could feel the shift immediately. Bryce gathered his folder. I'm not participating in this until governance is cleaned up. That was ally number 1 gone. Marisol stood next. Accounting will not release any new discretionary disbursements without dual authorization and written confirmation from counsel. That was operational resistance. Then Frank removed the printed restructuring outline from in front of him, folded it once, and set it aside like something dirty. Nobody on that floor is taking direction from a consultant or a husband until the board and the bank sort this out. That was social collapse inside the company. Corinne looked around the room as if betrayal had happened to her. It almost would have been impressive if it had not been so familiar. She had spent her life believing withdrawal of support was cruelty, only when it happened to her. You're all overreacting, she said. Dad wanted this transition. I opened my bag and took out the spiral notebook from the brownstone. Not theatrically. Just enough. My father also wrote 9 days before he died. Do not rush millwork until ledger reviewed. Need Celeste in room for signatures if awake enough. No one moved. I handed the notebook to Talbot. He read the line once, then again, and the color changed in his face so slightly most people would not have caught it. I did. Corinna did too. That notebook proves nothing, she said too fast. Maybe, I said, but combined with the false memo, the missing ledger, the removed insurance binders, the rush on bank certification, and your statement that Dad handed you the necklace on a Sunday he was hospitalized, it proves enough to stop every transfer you were trying to make. That was the break. Not one sound. Several. A chair shifting. Papers being stacked. Frank's watch tapping the table edge. The low mechanical hum of the ventilation system over a room that no longer belonged to Corinne's version of events. Then Talbot made the decision that finished it. He closed the notebook and said, until capacity, execution circumstances, and related company governance are reviewed, I am advising Miss Hale to suspend all transition actions. Miss Hale, not Corinne, not our family, not solidarity. A client name, Nolan swore under his breath. Bryce walked out without shaking anyone's hand. Marisol began collecting the documents Corinne had distributed as if they were already part of a record she did not trust. Luis pulled out his phone, no doubt messaging 3 people before he reached the hallway. Frank stayed standing, planted and quiet. A man who had just watched the future of the company stop falling sideways. And Corinne, still wearing my father's necklace. looked suddenly what she had not looked once since the funeral. Unprepared. For the first time, she was not standing inside a transfer. She was standing inside a failed attempt. The bank froze the remaining draw at 8:12 the next morning. Seth forwarded the notice with no commentary, just the attached letter from First Harbor Commercial Bank. Pending resolution of disputed authority, lender review, and document irregularities, the undisbursed balance of $450,000 under the Hale Storage Bridge facility would remain suspended. Any attempt to alter operational control, redirect borrower communications, or modify authorized signatory access without verified governance compliance would trigger default review. Corinne had moved fast because she needed that money. Now she was standing in front of a closed gate. By noon, the next loss arrived. The brokerage handling a possible pre-probate listing of the brownstone withdrew after counsel was notified of contested estate authority. At 2:40, our insurance carrier requested confirmation that no unauthorized executive transition had occurred at Hale Interior Millwork because any misstatement affecting key person coverage could impair renewal. By 4, Bryce Veller had sent a short email to Corinne, Talbot, Seth, and me, formally disengaging from all advisory work due to unresolved governance risk and alleged document discrepancies. That was the financial collapse. Not dramatic in sound, brutal in effect. No access. No clean sale. No consultant. No fast path. The social part unraveled even more quietly. Frank sent a note to supervisors reminding them that all floor instructions would continue through established channels until board notice changed otherwise. Marisol asked counsel to preserve the accounting server logs from the weekend. Darnell reported that Nolan had tried to call 2 vendors directly, and both had redirected him back to purchasing. Pastor Lynn left me a voicemail I did not return until evening. He said only, "Your father trusted the person who stayed." I saved the message. At 5:30 I went back to the factory. Not for a speech. Not for a victory lap. I had spent enough years in legal offices to know that when structures hold, the smartest thing a person can do is stop talking and let them keep holding. The sample library was empty. The conference table had been cleared. My father's brass nameplate had been returned to his office, though not by Corinne. I put the spiral notebook in the top drawer of my desk, locked it, and walked the floor once, slowly. Men were loading finished panels onto padded racks for a hotel project in Tribeca. A radio played somewhere near finishing, low and half lost under machine noise. Someone had left a half-drunk coffee beside a stack of cut sheets. Ordinary work. That was what my father had loved most in the end, I think. Not ownership in the abstract. Not the performance of power. The fact that a place could keep producing if the right people respected the sequence. When I reached the assembly side, Frank looked up from a work order and said, "You staying?" It was a small question. It carried more than most big ones. "Yes," I said. He nodded once and went back to work. That was the emotional shift. Not applause. Not apology. Recognition. When I left, the light outside had turned the yard the color of old steel. I sat in my car for a moment before driving and opened the small velvet pouch I had taken from my father's bedroom safe shelf the day before. Corinne had emptied the obvious trays. She had missed the hidden compartment behind them. Inside was the necklace certificate, purchase date, insurance rider, and one folded card in my father's handwriting. For Celeste, when the timing is right, no argument was left in me after that. I put the card back, started the car, and drove home through evening traffic while the company, the bank, and the paper structures he trusted kept speaking in a language louder than any family lie ever could. They had tried to remove me at the table, but I had never been the extra daughter. I had been the system they thought they could bypass.